Hello, it's Amy. I'm back again reading from the Journal of Emily Shore, and we are on page 288 of the 1891 edition, beginning with the entry for December the 4th, 1838. And if you'll recall from our last reading, Emily had just boarded the David Lyon, and we are picking up on her voyage to Madeira. So December 4th, Tuesday. I saw for the first time a ship in mourning, i.e. with a stripe of blue paint. There was a whole fleet of fishing boats at anchor, and we were much amused with seeing the fishermen dragging up their nets full of small fishes, looking like bags of silver. After dinner, the gentlemen did not let us retire. Indeed, there was no warm room to retire to, so we three ladies merely betook ourselves to the sofa and stove, while they sat over their wine. The conversation was kept up entirely between Captain Selby and Mr. Houghton. The mate sat stiff, determined, and sinister at the bottom of the table. The heavy man, who I think is the pilot, sat grave and silent, and Mr. Cross seemed too shy to talk. The captain and Mr. Houghton fell upon politics and discussed the aristocracy in toto, the individuality to the great amusement of Mamma and me in our dark corner. At length, Mr. Houghton came and seated himself by us and talked to Mamma. I got up at last from the sofa and followed Mamma from the hot room to our cool cabin, where we looked out of the window, saw that all was dark and gloomy, and returned with our work-boxes, with which we went to the table. We entered into a long conversation about Madeira and the West Indies, the climate and its victims, thence to the slaves, the Baptist missionaries, the mischief they are declared to have done and to be doing, then to the subject of dissent and dissenters in general, the reasons and causes of it, the state of the church, the former neglect and present zeal of its ministers, the violence of party spirit and faction, the differences of religious opinions, the low state of religion in the upper classes, subjects which I should not have expected to discuss with a West Indian captain and a Madeira merchant. The good captain was amusingly vehement about the neglect of the clergy and the consequent spread of dissent, and I think, with the best intentions, went a little out of his depth. December 7th, Friday. Again I saw Ryde and its half-mile of pier. Again the pretty terraces of the cows to behold, which Louisa and I rose from a lesson in Portuguese pronunciation which Mr. H. was giving us. On we went through a narrow channel, bounded on one side by the island, on the other by the shingles, which the tide rendered just visible. The coast of White became more bold and bare, with dark-coloured heathy hills terminating in rock, and at length Yarmouth with its church and houses appeared through the little side window, as if in a picture frame. The last object on the Hampshire coast was Hurst Castle, on a low, sandy slip of land. When we had passed it, it grew dusk, and just faintly discerned through the misty twilight, the Needles began to appear ahead. We were most anxious to reach these before dark, and were delighted when point behind point of land rapidly came in sight as the breeze drove us through the narrow channel. At length, before the night had closed in, all the Needles stood out clearly and distinctly before us, low, massy white rocks rising abruptly out of the smooth dark sea, in a line running out from the rocky island, whose highest peak immediately above was crowned with a lighthouse. I now alternately looked out of the stern window to see the receding lights of Hurst Castle, and out of the side window of the dining cabin to watch the Needles as they seemed to glide past. At last it was only from the stern that anything at all could be seen, and that anything was only a dim outline of chalky cliff with a pale light on its summit, and the brilliant double lights of the Hurst Castle like twin sisters on the horizon. That outline of hazy cliff was the last I saw of British shore, perhaps the last I shall ever see. It rapidly became still dimmer, then disappeared, but the pale light still gleamed above, now apparently in the sky, and the double fires below were not yet sunk into the waters. At length all was gone, and I could see nothing from the stern windows but the heavens, spangled with glittering frosty stars, and an unbroken expanse of dark purple sea, slightly undulating, on which our ship left 2 bright tracks of foam behind her. December 8th, Saturday. While we were sitting after dinner, I looked out of the little side window and saw a bright double light on the horizon. This was the light on the Lizard Point, the last glimpse of old England. It long continued steadily in sight when it seemed occasionally to dip into the water, and then by degrees it only emerged now and then as the vessel rolled, and at last it wholly disappeared, and so farewell to my native land, perhaps forever. December 9th, Sunday. I continue to be an excellent sailor and enjoy myself thoroughly on board. My cough is almost gone, and I never wake up feverish and throbbing as I did in England. Really, I shall hardly be an invalid when I reach Madeira. I already perceive a difference of temperature. It must, however, be an unusually warm December, or we could not, as we have done ever since we came on board, have dressed every morning with open windows. We sit with windows open all the morning. The days are lengthening now at each end, and Mamma's watch is half an hour faster than the time in this latitude. The captain is highly amusing with his honesty, his good temper, his eagerness in conversation, his vehemence in politics, his abundance of anecdote, his love of a joke, and withal his very strong Northumbrian dialect. I think he must be about 50 years old, and is rather grey already. He bade me listen this evening to the sound of the waves breaking against the ship's side with a loud splashing sound. That, he says, is our music at sea. I call it harp and piano together. I like it better than any other music, which is because it is a sign that the wind is exactly aft. December 10th, Monday. When the sun shines, the hues of the train left by a ship in her wake are very beautiful. Blue and purple and emerald green mingled with masses of ice and spar, together with the snowy heaps of foam, and when night comes I am never tired of watching the luminous sparks. December 12th, Wednesday. Sat laughing and talking and watching the sailors at their occupations. 2 of these particularly attracted our attention. One was the man I sketched at the wheel, whom we have often noticed since, for he has a very uncommon appearance. He has a short, thick figure, but his face is like that of an antique statue, the features chiselled with almost Grecian perfection, and the profile in particular quite beautiful. The sickly, melancholy, unchanging expression of his sallow face, the strong contrast of jetty eyebrows over eyes of a light, though not staring blue, the lips that even when he speaks seem never to open, the quiet, unvarying cast of his whole demeanour, his seeming unconsciousness of ever meeting your eye, all give this man a singular appearance. The other, whom we noticed, is remarkable only for being handsome, but in quite a different style. His eyes are merry, his complexion is fair and very bright, and his fine features have a frank, quick, good-natured expression. He was at the wheel this evening, and his face and person were set off to great advantage by his picturesque dress, broad-brimmed sailor's hat and blue shirt, and the attentive eye required by his occupation. We observed also several others of the sailors, and I wished that I could know the history of each individual and be able to judge how far his expression indicated his character. I could not refrain from running out once or twice to look at the starry heavens. It was a magnificent, glorious sight, and to me the more striking from its novelty, for I have not before seen the dark blue heaven set with tens, thousands gems, and arched with the pale Milky Way, though through the sharp black tracery of ropes and spars, and the broad shadowy sheets of canvas, scarcely swelling in the soft breeze. I hope to be able to venture on a longer gaze some future nights upon this most beautiful, most wonderful of created scenes. And so I think we'll leave it at that today. We're almost at the 10-minute mark, and Emily seems to have been enjoying her voyage up to this point. When we return, we will begin with the entry for December the 14th, 1838.